welcome. I am here with Sarah Athanas. She is the co-founder and owner of Groundwork Coworking in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And Sarah, you recently celebrated 10 years. Is that right? Or are you coming up on 10 years?
Yes, we are coming up in November,
Okay,
actually.
you're
So
so
we're
close.
yes, very close. Yeah, super exciting.
Yeah. I don't know if I realized you've been open for so long. 10 years is a
I
major
know.
milestone.
I can't believe it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, where did the time
Right.
go? I mean, sometimes I think, wow, that went by so fast. And then I start to think about it and I'm like, wow, that actually was really long. A lot happened in those
So
10
many
years.
ways. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, you lived through the pandemic. I know. I always tell people when I'm working with them, when people who are just opening, like even the idea of signing a 5-year lease seems like an eternity,
hmm
right? Like 5 years of life seems like such a commitment. I'm like, oh, you just wait.
Yeah.
You'll get to 7 or 10 and be like, five won't
Yeah.
be nearly it. You won't be ready to make any decisions in 5 years, probably.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it goes
Did
by.
you, what was your, I'm just curious now, what was your initial lease length?
So it was not a traditional commercial lease because we rent from the city. We're in a municipal building. So
Oh,
it's a little bit of a different situation. So we had our original agreement with them was for 3 years and it was like a very discounted rent. So after we kind of got through those 3 years, we had to renegotiate.
yeah. Okay, interesting. But they renewed it. Yeah, I don't think I knew that. So
Yes.
Sarah is in actually, we were talking about groundwork and groundswell. I work with Jess from Groundswell, and we were talking about our operator membership. She's like, is it like top secret? I don't know about this operator membership. I'm like, yes, it's kind of under the radar. But so I know a little bit about your business because you would come to office hours, which is
Yes.
amazing.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we would dive
Yeah.
in a little bit and you just opened a second location. But okay, so
Yes.
3 years, was it like a grant or because
Yeah,
technically
so the
so
3
new.
years was we partnered with a city, and this is a very, like, Massachusetts specific thing, but there was actually, believe it or not, grant funding for collaborative workspaces in Massachusetts gateway cities, which is, like, a very
Back then in
specific.
2014.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah, yep. So we partnered, we were actually the first recipients of the grant, so we were kind of like a pilot, and we partnered with our city and the Economic Development Council to get funding to do some of the necessary the really the expensive thing that needed to happen was wheelchair accessibility because it's a public building, so we
yep.
got funding to put in the ramp and to put in some other things like a kitchen and some dividers for offices, but it was very minimal. We only had like 2 private offices when we opened, which is a whole nother story. So part of that grant was the grant has to be 100% matched. And so one of the ways that the city came up with the match was to discount our rent for a period of
Oh,
3 years. So
yep.
it was a win-win situation. We were funneling money into this building that they owned and
Yeah.
we were getting cheaper rent. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So did you have to put the money in up front you got the grant to do the improvements that you needed to do to be ADA compliant, essentially?
Correct. Yep,
Yeah. Okay,
exactly.
got it. Yeah. But the discounted rent helps a ton. I mean, that's one of the most you just opened a second space. I mean, it's one of the
Yes.
most challenging aspects of the business is like that, getting off the ground.
It
Uh,
was huge. Yeah.
okay, so tell me your co-working story. How did you know that you wanted to do this? And it sounds like there were a few of you to start. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, I
Okay.
did have one partner to
Okay.
start. So yeah, so my co-working story, it's kind of an interesting story, but I was actually living in Argentina before I started my co-working space. I was working for a language education company there. And I was in my late 20s and I had like a lot of responsibility I was basically like managing their whole operation in Argentina. So it was like it's great because I got to live in Buenos Aires. I was young, but I was like super stressed out all the time and spending long days in the office. And the guy that I was dating at the time was a digital nomad. So he brought me to this co working space he was working at, which I believe is still in operation. It's called Urban Station. And
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I went to this co working space and I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. This is like I want to be like these
Right,
people,
totally.
like
They're all chill and happy with their
they're
laptops and
so,
like,
yeah,
oh
they're
my
drinking
God.
their
Yeah.
coffee and like they're not
Like
stressed out
life
at
is
all.
amazing. Exactly.
Totally. So that was kind of what got
That's
like
so
planted the
interesting.
seed. Although at
Yeah.
that time I really just wanted to be a member of a co-working space. I
Right.
wasn't like,
No,
oh, I
it
want
didn't
to
occur
own
to
one of
you.
these things. So yeah, like, fast forward several years, I'm back in the United States and I was freelancing at that time and there weren't any co-working spaces in my area. So that's when I was like, like there's got
You
to be a
just knew
place where,
about this. Life is so
yeah,
funny. Like, what if you didn't date this guy who I don't know how you met, but he's a digital nomad. He takes you to this co-working space, like
totally. Yeah.
kind of random events that had a big
And it was
impact on.
yeah, yeah, I mean, I didn't even know like, at that time, I didn't even know that you could be a digital nomad, like, I didn't even know
Right.
that was, like, a thing, like, "Oh my god, these people are just living in Argentina because they can," like, wow.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that's very cool. I might have to find
Mhm.
that space and get him on the podcast. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they've been around for a while because that was, like, 2010 maybe,
right.
2011. Yeah.
Okay, so and then okay, so then you're a freelancer, you don't want to be at home, you have this idea. So yeah, give us a little more detail. So you've found someone else and talked them into doing this with you, and how did you
Yes.
come up with space from the city?
Yeah, so I at the time I got together with a friend who became my business partner, and she had more of an arts background, and she actually had the connection to New Bedford because she went to art school in New Bedford, and so
Okay.
she brought me to New Bedford, and I was like, "Oh, this town has got like a really great vibe. It has a lot going on." And then it was like literally I was like on the city of New Bedford's website, and I somehow ended up on the Economic Development Council's website, and there was this little sentence that said, like, if you want to start a business in New Bedford, email this person. And so I just clicked,
Okay.
I sent an email. The next thing I know, they're like showing us space and they were like, oh my God, like, we want a co working space. You don't even know. Like, we were just talking about this in the mayor's office. And so it was a little bit of like being in the right place at the right
Yeah.
time with the right idea that just sort of it all fell into place.
Yeah. Okay, that's incredible. Yeah, and New Bedford's not tiny. It looks like it's about 100,000 people.
It's about 100,000. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, but not huge. And you're how far are you from Boston?
We are about an hour without traffic, can be as much as 2 hours with traffic depending on what time of day you're going. So,
Yes.
yeah, and we're not connected yet by the commuter rail, but that is hope should be coming actually next year. So,
Pretty cool.
that'll be a big deal for us.
Yeah, that'll probably send the population continue to grow, I would guess. I
Yes.
also
Yeah.
didn't know you went to school in Santa Barbara.
Yes, I did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you went back to Massachusetts. I mean, I guess by way of
I know.
Argentina, you had a meandering path, but I'm like, wow, who
Yep.
goes to Santa Barbara and leaves ever?
Just I ask myself that question like all the time.
In like
I
February, you're like,
yeah.
why am I not in Santa Barbara? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Very cool. Although it looks like you have a master's degree, an MBA from UMass Dartmouth. So,
Yeah, I'm in my last semester right now,
oh,
so
you're
I'm,
doing
like,
that now.
just crossing the finish line of the MBA. Yeah.
That's so cool. Okay, that
Yeah.
I didn't even notice the dates on there. That's funny. I just assumed. Yeah, is it I can imagine it's very cool to do it as you have so much context
Mhm. Mhm.
as an adult. Like I have an MBA and I did it when I was in my 20s and you just I mean I had worked a little bit, but like it's so intellectual at that point. It's not like
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
like you
It's
don't
not
really
grounded in
get it. Yeah.
reality. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll have to talk about how that once we get to your outside of co-working life, we'll talk about maybe what you're doing with that. So, okay. And how many square feet was your first location?
So it started off right around 5,000, a little more than
Okay.
5,000, and we added twice since we opened actually, so now we're right around 7,000 square feet.
Okay. And is it still a lease with the city or what is it?
Yes, it's still a
Okay.
lease with the city. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. And you added some more offices, but you don't have a ton of offices.
We have quite a few now. So we
Okay.
added our second expansion, we added like 10 small offices.
Okay.
So yeah, so now we have we have 15
Oh,
offices in
you
that
do.
first
Okay,
space.
got
Yep.
it. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
in a 7,000
So
feet.
went from
Okay.
2 to
Two.
15, which was
Yes.
definitely a game changer.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Was that post pandemic?
So the 10 office expansion was actually right in the middle of the pandemic. So we started working on it pre-COVID, and then it
Okay.
just sort of was like, oh my God, is this actually going to happen? But we did get it across the finish line. And so it was sort of like, I think we were still really like in the pandemic when we started selling those offices. And surprisingly, they sold because people were like, I don't want to be around other people. So,
During the yeah.
right.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I mean, we'll talk about who are your typical members? What does your membership look like in
Ooh,
your first
yeah.
location? And then we'll talk about your second location.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we have, I think because New Bedford is such a kind of funky little city, we don't really have like the typical members that you would have in a big city. So it really varies a lot. And I think one of the things that's interesting about our membership is that we have a lot of small nonprofits. There
Huh.
are a ton of nonprofits around here. And so co working works really well for those nonprofits that
Yeah.
have like maybe one or two staff
Yep.
members, but they need a larger space to have board meetings and things like that. So we have a lot of nonprofits, which is fun because it brings a lot of energy into the space,
Yeah.
and they hold events, and it just kind of creates a more lively vibe.
Yeah. Without you
But
having to do all the work. It's like
yes,
inherent
yeah,
vibe.
it's great. Yeah, they're like the perfect we're just like keep those members happy, like no matter what we do, you know. And then we do have your typical remote workers, much more so now after the pandemic. And we also have New Bedford is sort of this growing center for the offshore wind industry on the East Coast. So we
Hmm.
also that's been like a really interesting segment for us is companies from like Denmark and England coming over where they need an office for 6 months because they're working on a project or
Huh.
they need a mailing address
Interesting.
or
Yeah.
or whatever it is. So those are interesting. So it's like they'll use the space a lot for like 4 months
Okay.
and then they'll
And then they
disappear
roll.
because the
Yeah.
project is over. But there's enough of that coming through that it definitely helps. It makes a difference.
Yeah. And you're right on the water. So it used to be, I always like to poke around and people, town. It's like used to be like
Yeah.
a whaling town.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're like historic whaling capital. Now we have a really busy fishing port. So it's actually
Okay.
like one of the points of pride in the city is that we're like the highest grossing commercial port in the United States, which
Wow.
surprises a lot of people. And we have the offshore wind industry as well.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it's so beautiful. I would kind of want to come visit, especially this time of year. It's like so like
Yes. Yeah. It's
quintessential New
really
England.
nice.
You're on the water. So pretty. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So New Bedford's been open for 10 years. Tell us about Fall River.
Yeah, so Fall River opened 2 years ago, and that project started because I was actually approached by a developer. So he had this project that was mixed use commercial residential, and he was kind of trying to put together different partners and thinking he was really intentional about who he wanted in the commercial space, and he really wanted co-working to be part of the mix. So he actually joined our space and like really
Nice.
went through a lot of effort to understand co-working, to attend events, to kind of build a relationship. So it was nice because we had like a basis of like a relationship to kind of move forward and make the deal.
Yeah. Okay. And Fall River is also about 100,000
Hmm.
people. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how far from your current space or your original space?
It's about 15 minutes away. And it's interesting because people do not move back and forth between the
Okay.
cities at all. There's like a New Bedford thing and a Fall River thing and not a lot of mixing, which is fascinating. But so yeah, they're close, but in some ways feels like very far apart.
Yeah. Okay. So it's mixed use. Co-working is retail level.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I don't have the update. How is that going? You put in office, I mean, you put in kind of a typical mix there.
Yep.
Yeah. Talk more about, and the
Yeah.
developer give you some rent abatement, like incentive to be in the building and give you some time to get
Yes.
ramped up.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So when I started working on that space, I really wanted to do it as a management agreement.
Yeah.
And I kind of spent a lot of time going around in circles trying to figure out how to make that work. I actually took your class on management agreements, and it was super helpful because I was like, oh, yeah, duh. Like it's just not enough square footage. So it's not going to work. So it was too small to make that
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
So what we ended up working out with the landlord was that he pays us a service agreement for the residents of the apartments to be able to use the space. And so it sort of works out as like we're getting a discounted rent on that space as
Yeah.
well. So and again, it's like a win-win because we get the residents coming down, which kind of adds to some activity in the flex space. They just get a flex membership, so they don't get if they want a desk or an office, they still have to pay for that. But we get discounted rent, and so it's a good setup.
And so he's essentially investing in an amenity space for the building. Like
Exactly.
that's kind of
Yeah.
how it falls out. And are they
Yes.
using it?
They are, not as much as I thought. But one of the residents actually is renting an office, and she may expand to add a second office, so that's, like she's
She's like
great.
living the
She's like a
dream. She's
she's
like,
totally living the dream. She's a color analyst. That's her business. Yeah.
okay. I mean, we won't go down the
She's
rabbit hole of what is that?
she's like everybody's favorite member. Like, she'll tell you what colors you should wear that are like, if you're a spring or a summer or
Yeah.
fall or what have you. So she's a really cool member. And we have a couple others that come in from the space, from the apartments, but it's not a huge number.
Yeah. I know. I feel like people always think there's so much residential. Like, of course they're going to join. And just doesn't always like work out that way. You think, oh, there's this built-in demand right here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was surprising to me
Yeah.
that's not the case, but
Yeah.
it's sort of like you never know.
Yeah. And but I bet do they show it on tours to the residents that live there?
They do. I don't know if they've been doing that as much. I've seen less of the property manager kind of coming through with potential residents, although also I haven't been in the space that
Yeah.
much lately. So maybe it is still happening and I'm just
Yeah.
not aware of it. But yeah, that was sort of, I think one of the important things was that, them showing the tours and us kind of working with them to create like an onboarding ramp for
Yeah.
for the residents.
Yeah. And even just like one of those, like, even if the residents don't use it, they feel like there's such a big value that it's there, like that perceived
Yeah,
value, even though they don't.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
this space is staffed at least part time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So both of our spaces are staffed from when the space opens, which is 9 in Fall River, 8:30 in New Bedford until 2.
Okay.
So it kind of gets them
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
lunch
The main
and
part of
sort
the
of
day. Yeah.
the main part of the day where people generally need things. The Fall River space is not staffed on Fridays because it tends to be really quiet on Fridays. So it's just Monday through Thursday there.
Yeah. I was in Chicago in August and we stayed in this condo building that it was new and it had these really nice amenity spaces. It had a maker space in it, which was,
Cool.
it didn't have like a 3D, I didn't see a 3D printer, but it just had these very cool spaces, but it was not like activated in any way.
Mm,
I had this really pretty co-working space and a kitchen. And I get to see like if you just want quiet time outside of your apartment, like that would be nice, but it wasn't
right.
like super compelling in terms of like the vibe or the
Mm,
environment. It was just like another quiet space to go in the building. So
right. Yeah.
I love it that the developer was like, no, I want a co-working space that's, staffed and
Hmm.
activated
Hmm.
and even if
Yeah.
it's not, not sitting down hundreds of people all the time. But
Yeah. And
yeah.
he actually works in the space too. He has an office there.
Oh,
So he's
nice.
like he gets it. He's into the co-working thing, which is great.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, so so talk about, well, I won't make you spend too much time on this. I know you just and I missed it. Kat had you on talking about marketing
Oh,
on
yes.
your
Yeah.
convo recently. I just saw that. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
Sarah's, I hope she isn't sick of doing these kind of sessions. But yeah, I mean, you're in a smaller market, not tiny markets. 100,000
Hmm.
is totally respectable. But d- what are the levers you pull for marketing? And you have a marketing background. I mean, would you say your background is essentially marketing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So it's interesting because like I was actually looking before this podcast to be like, oh, are our leads still coming from where I think they're coming
Yeah.
from? They are mostly still coming from organic search. So
Yep.
Google and Google My Business Profile, which I think is partially because we are the only player
Yeah.
in our market. So, if you're looking for co-working,
Good news,
you're
bad
going to find
news.
us.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Good news, bad news. The bad news of that is it's not like obvious there aren't obvious levers to pull. Like, it's not like, "Oh, let's just run some paid ads and,
Yeah.
we'll get a ton of people coming into our space." So we
Yep.
do need to be more creative when we feel like there's a drop in inquiries. It's like kind of get back to the drawing board. Like, do we need to have open houses? Do we need to start getting out and going to events again? Usually it's kind of like a mix of those things. Our second largest source of members after Google is word of mouth. So
Okay.
it's
Yep.
it's either it's
Yeah.
either organic or it's like we're out in the community making sure that people know about
Yeah.
us.
Which is just
So
more work. It's like, "Oh, great. I don't have to spend money on Google ads. Oh, bummer. I can't just spend money on Google ads."
yes,
And you've
exactly,
done I remember
exactly.
you had a member who was testing Facebook ads for you. And those
Yes, yeah.
also you feel like those just never moved the
Not
needle.
significant enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they've never been significant enough to be like, "Yeah, let's keep doing this as part of our strategy." So
Yeah.
it's really we've really just stuck with like, as tempting as because I have a marketing background, I'm always like,
Yes.
"Ooh, I wanna try this ad
Paid.
campaign,
Yes.
see if it works and, like, measure everything." But as tempting as that is, it's like, nope, it's organic, so we need to stay on top of our SEO and make sure that we're still,
Yep.
producing new content and crossing off all those boxes, and then it's the word of mouth. So are we showing up in the community? Honestly, our nonprofit members are like super helpful in that regard. So again, it's like keeping those members happy, making
Yeah.
sure they're engaged because they
Yep.
will bring a lot of foot traffic in for us as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it's important to kind of know that when you get into it because you have to be willing. It's not like
Yeah.
you can't be a passive owner and just sort of pay somebody to run ads for you and your customers are going to walk in the door. You have to really want to be a part of the community and do that work because
Hmm.
otherwise it's not sort of just if you build it, they will come. I mean, to some extent, to your point, you're getting organic search volume. And do you feel like that's, I mean, in 10 years, has there been a shift of like, oh, people, get it now? Or, I mean, because like work bars and, they have, I don't know how many locations they have, a number
Yep.
of locations. They must
Yes.
have
Yeah.
started, I don't know, 2010 or something like that. So they've been at like
Hmm.
kind of
They've
growing
been around. Yeah.
awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's more awareness now. I think often now, like when we first started, there was a lot more of just like people don't even know what co-working is. And I think now at this point, at least everybody has seen We Crashed or they've
Yes.
read something, but they've read about it in Wall Street Journal or whatever it is. But I think a lot of people in smaller markets don't necessarily think it's something for them. So they might have this perception that it's like this thing that happens in cities and
Yeah.
it's startups and it's like a very specific type
Yep.
of person that would use a co-working space. So often the challenge is like telling the story to make that connection of like, oh, this is I could use this just to meet with my client one time a week, or like I could use this for my nonprofit or whatever it is. So I think that's kind of more of the work now is like finding the less traditional use cases and
Yeah.
like, letting
Connecting the
people
dots
know.
for people. Like, yes. Oh, and
Exactly.
I love the way you put that. And you have a newsletter and you do member features and you have a lot of ways to kind of tell the story.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but I definitely think a lot of it's really important to put the story out there in all those different channels, but a lot of it really does come down to one-on-one conversations a lot
And
of the time, and
explaining. Yeah.
it's I mean, and I guess that's a benefit too of being a smaller space is, like, you don't have to sell that many memberships to fill your space, so it is manageable, but it is also, like, there aren't a lot of shortcuts, like, yes, you
Yeah.
do have to get out there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me, you mentioned your spaces are staffed 9 to 2. Tell me about your team.
Yeah, so we have 2 part-time community coordinators. They staff one we have 1 in each location. We've tried kind of mixing them and having them move back and forth between the locations, but they actually I feel like there was less job satisfaction because they didn't really have a sense of ownership over like
Yeah.
the space and the community. So now there's one in each location. And then I also have a general manager. So she kind of oversees the part-time staff and all the day-to-day operations. And then I meet with her on a weekly basis to
Okay.
kind of look at some of the more high-level stuff.
Okay, got it. So when it
Yeah.
comes to like, okay, we need to boost our, community engagement and, kind of make sure we keep the leads coming in. Is that your GM or do you still kind of get really involved in that?
Yeah, it depends. That's definitely a conversation that will happen with me and her first because we're kind of in our meetings, we're looking at the scorecards and the
Okay.
financials. So it's
Yep.
sort of like we'll be like, okay, we're slumping a little bit. What do we
Yeah.
need to do? And so there might be some brainstorming there. I still provide a lot of direction with the marketing because that's more of my background. So I'm kind of, pushing that engine a little bit more, but I try to, you know, put out the ideas and let them run with it so that they still feel like there's some ownership and they're making some decisions about like the actual content of the posts or, whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah. So you're back to your part-time team. Will they, if one of them's sick, will they like do a little coverage? Like they have a home base, but
Yes.
do they? Okay.
Yeah, and it's nice now because there's a general manager and we have me, so there's a lot of options
Somebody
to
can
plug
fill in.
people
Yeah.
in. It
Yeah.
used to feel really, like, strained when it was, like, me and one other person or, me and 2 other people, so it's nice that we have a little bit of a deeper bench now.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so but you also have taken on a new role. So
Yes.
you're doing more than just co-working now. Yeah, tell us about that. And how does
Yeah,
it fit into your co-working role? You might still be sort of figuring that out, but I think
yeah,
there are a lot of people who do, who don't only do co-working, who have other things that they do. And,
yep.
I think for some people it's like hard to imagine like how do you balance those things? So I'd love to hear
Mm.
about, kind of how you think about that and the transition.
Yeah, I'm definitely still figuring it out because it's a lot. I have a lot of balls in the air, but I'm working so the Green Shuttle is my father's company, so it's actually a family business. So I stepped into a business development role with that company, which at this point, and I guess I should back up and say what they do. So they're a private transportation company, so we mostly bring people to the airport for flights and medical appointments as well. They're all hybrid vehicles. Right now, they primarily serve, between the Cape and Boston and Providence, but we are expanding to have some more business on the South Coast where I'm located. So it's a very different business from
Totally. Like,
co-working.
yes.
I'm not sure if I would have ended up in this if it weren't a family business, but, it seems like an interesting leap to try to dip my toes into that. But again, it is a family business. So it's also like, my dad is like not ready. He's not like me, like he likes to be involved. So a little bit of a
You're
balance of I'm kind of
navigating that.
learning
Yeah.
things and I'm getting involved in the marketing and, figuring out where it makes sense to kind of make changes and insert myself. So that's been fun. It's definitely interesting and it's interesting how you learn a lot of things about your own business by working on a business that's different from yours.
Totally.
Like, oh, this is how they manage this or sometimes I'm able to bring things in too like, wow, they need a better process around payroll or whatever it might be. So it is like a really great learning opportunity in that way to be involved in two very different things.
Yeah, it's like cross-pollinating and it makes your brain sort of, yeah, think differently.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally. Okay, so are you working on that business from the co-working space?
Often I am, yeah. So I go down to their office once a week, which I think is good just to kind of get the face to face and
Yeah.
like get more of a sense of like what's going on in real time. But yeah, often I'm going into my co-working spaces to work, which is super fun, especially now. Like
Mm.
some members don't actually know who I am. So
And
I'm
to
like
yell when
under
you're in
the
there?
radar. I'm just like, oh, hey, I'm Sarah. How's it going? Nice to meet you. And I get to kind of pretend like I'm just another member, which is super, it's really funny. I enjoy that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so and you can actually get work done in your space because probably like that's sort of the
Yes.
irony of being a co-working space owner. I mean, I remember that so much. Like you certainly you did. Well, do you have an office or do you sit in the
I
open
actually have
space?
a dedicated desk,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it's very strategic. It's like in the back of the space,
Like
so
in a
like you
little
can't.
nook.
I'm behind a divider, like you can't really see that I'm there. But it is like I will say that like I had to be very intentional. Like I had to kind of disappear for a couple months to like break the habits
Yep.
of me being asked for things, and then I was able to go
Totally.
back. So it took some. There was some intention around the transition, but it's really great to be able to, like, appreciate the community now and actually
Yeah.
get work done and feel like I can go there without, being attacked with a bunch
Right.
of questions.
So that time was so that your members could really see like the team's in charge. There,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
go to them. I'm just here to work, or I'm not telling you who I am, so that you
Yes,
can't ask me
exactly.
like, "Why are we out of oat milk?" Or
Yeah, exactly.
whatever
The
little thing.
printer's not working, things like that, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, just tell me thinking back a little bit, what did you need to get in like, did you have the things in place for your team to be pretty independent? It sounds like you have a weekly meeting. I'm guessing you chime in, kind of as needed, but
Mhm.
there are
Yeah.
probably people listening who are like, "Yeah, I would like to, show up in my space as a member and just have the team be in charge." But, we even have in our community manager program, we have somebody who's going out on maternity leave, and she's, like, trying to wrap her head around, like, what does the team
Mhm.
need to be totally, self-sufficient while I'm gone? So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, were there things you needed to put in place or what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, step 1 is definitely documenting processes, and that was something that I was inspired. I read the E-Myth
Yeah,
back in sometime during the pandemic, I think, and I was like, "Oh my god, I need to
that book
do
never
this."
gets old. I love that book.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like, I totally relate to this frazzled
Mhm.
woman that's baking pies and so I during the pandemic, I had a lot of downtime because we reopened as soon as we could, but there might be like 5 people in the
Yeah.
space on a given day. So I was like, I'm gonna start working on this to so that I don't go crazy. So I kind of had like a start to, all of our documentation of our systems. It took a long time to like trial and error and update and like it's a living document, like we're
Yeah.
still very much working on those, but I think that was an important basis to have. And then I think I kind of, in some ways, it wasn't really strategic, but it just ended up being lucky. I started working with our mutual friend Abigail at Space Savvy
That's
Studio.
right. I totally forgot about
Yeah,
that.
yep.
Yes.
And when I started working with her, I didn't have a general manager, and it was more just like, I'm really sick of doing these things. Will you do them for me?
Yeah.
But then I sort of formulated this plan to hire a general manager, and so it became much more like, help me kind of optimize
Get
these
ready for that.
systems so
Yeah.
that the team can function without me and that the general manager can be empowered. So that was really helpful just to kind of have an extra set of eyes on, building all the systems that we have. So that I'd say that was kind of like step 2, is getting someone from the outside to look at things in a fresh way and kind of help
Yeah.
you. And then it's just a matter of finding the right people. And that was something that like I wanted to promote someone to be a general manager for a couple of years before I actually did, and I kept hoping that like the person like maybe this will be the person. Then I was like, no, it's not quite. So when I had the right employee come along, I had to kind of like jump on it.
Just do
Like
it. Yeah.
we're doing it. This is
Yeah.
this is happening. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I think hiring and processes and delegating is like not easy. You think, oh, I'm just going to do all these right processes and SOPs, and I inevitably forget lots of things that I think are like I don't know. I just think are like obvious and not like we
Mhm.
hired somebody, she's working on, like, our community manager newsletter, and she showed me the draft. I was like, "Okay, well, that's not the right font, and that's not the right whatever," and I'm like, "Well, I didn't write it down anywhere," right? Like, I had done this whole Loom video of, with all the steps and thought, like, I had all the
Mhm.
processes. So to your point, like, it takes time to just get enough detail,
Yeah.
that you could kinda get everything right, the living document, but
Mm.
just getting that documentation down because now, like, you can take vacations. I mean, maybe not. No.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I can take vacation. I spent a month in France this summer as part of my MBA program. So it's like
Wow.
totally I was in touch with my general manager, but we suspended the weekly meetings. So we kind of had like asynchronous meetings where we
Yep.
would check in and we'd still keep the agenda, but I just kind of write notes in a Google Doc.
Yeah.
But that's like, I mean, even like 2 years ago, I would have never
Couldn't do it. Yeah.
ever imagined doing that. So yeah.
Yeah. So I have a book. It's actually sitting here. I'll show it. You probably, I don't know. You mentioned the E-Myth, but it's called Clockwork. It's by Mike. Oh, wait, hold on. You can't see because of my background. Oh, there
There
we
it
go.
is. There.
Mike Michalowicz. He's the profit first guy.
Oh,
I don't know if
yes.
you've
Okay.
ever,
Yep.
yeah,
I've
which
read
is
Profit
not everybody's
First.
a fan
Yeah.
of that. I'm the same way. Like he lost me after the 16 bank accounts. I do like his thinking about how to manage that, but
Mm,
Clockwork's really super helpful in terms of thinking about like his goal is basically try to be away for a month. Like, yeah,
mm,
get all these things in place with the goal that you could go away for a month and the place would run without you. And talks a lot
yeah.
about delegating to teams and having them run, through outcomes versus just like tasks, which is, I'm sure, a lot of what you've had to do with your team. And it sounds like your general
Mhm.
manager has access to the P&L. Like you go through numbers with her. I mean, she's really,
Yes. Yep.
yeah, under the hood
Yeah.
of the business so that she can really own retention and membership growth and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The transparency is so important. If
Yeah.
you're holding things back, it's really hard for them to feel like they have
Yeah.
ownership or that they
Yeah.
have a stake in the game. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a great book if anybody's looking for like just a framework to start thinking about. And he's all about the documentation and it's just, yeah, it's a good kind of it seems basic, but it's a good framework to go through if you're thinking about
Mm.
working on that. Okay, so tell us about your MBA and your month in France. That
Yeah,
sounds
so
great.
I also started my MBA during the pandemic, so clearly I was, like, going crazy. I was writing SOPs. I started a master's program. It's like,
What
"What
else
am
can
I
I do?
doing?" Yeah, what else can I do? So, yeah, so that's been really interesting. I mean, and you've done an MBA, so it's like, as a small business owner, some classes are much more relevant than
Yeah.
others. So some classes, I'm like, this is like, the 10,000-foot view
Yeah.
that is totally not helping the little guy in the trenches. I mean, it's
Yep.
interesting to have that perspective, but then other classes, particularly like the management and marketing, that was like really, I mean, I wrote like a really in-depth marketing strategy for Groundwork as like one of my assignments. So it was like really cool to
Yeah.
be able to nerd out on something that I'm actually
Yep.
doing. Like, oh,
And force yourself to
I'm
spend the
actually
time to
going to take
do it.
this.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that has been really interesting. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's a little unusual to do an MBA as a small business owner. A lot of people are sort of like, that seems like overkill. And,
Yeah.
in some ways it is, but it's also really opened my eyes to like growth potential and, just thinking on a different scale. Not that I'm
Yep.
actually interested in scaling Groundwork much more than it is, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to go through the exercise of like thinking about that. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm guessing there are things you can apply to the sorry, is it green?
the green shuttle.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
green shuttle. I love that name. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
as dad lets you kind of get into the strategic aspects because that's also a smaller business, but
It's a smaller business.
yeah,
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on there with, like, because the company owns all the cars, so there's a lot more with, like, managing assets and
financial, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yep.
and
So
real
that
operational kind of depth. Like, I mean, it's a legit. Would you call it a logistics I mean, is it logistics? Is
yes,
it? Yeah,
yeah, yeah, there's a lot of logistics involved and,
yeah,
flights are constantly changing, so, you're monitoring flights and, like, shifting drivers around and kind
yeah.
of, making sure that people are still getting picked up even if their flight got delayed, so, yeah, definitely a lot of logistics.
Yeah. Okay, are you glad that you wait, what so why were you in France?
So through my MBA program, I was able to do an exchange where I did 2 courses, and it was like I got credit for 2 courses
Yeah.
in, like, 12 days or 14 days or whatever it
Okay.
was. So, and I've been doing a lot of my courses online here just because it is easier to fit into my schedule as a
Yeah.
business owner. So I was really intrigued by actually being able to have, like, face-to-face class time. The students in the program were from all over the world, so I got to, interact with students from like Canada and India and Norway and South Africa. So that was really fun.
Yeah. And a month in France. We'll take that.
Yes, in a month in
Yeah.
France. Yeah, can't complain. Ate a lot of
Uh,
cheese.
totally. Cappuccinos, wine, and cheese, the best thing about
Yes,
France.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we're running out of time. So I want to ask just so you've been doing this for 10 years and two locations. Any like overall advice or detailed advice, however you want to go on this, to people either thinking about starting a space or thinking about expanding, like any just like kind of key lessons learned, like, okay, if I could do that over again, here's what I would tell my past self.
Ooh, that's a tough question. I think, especially, I mean, I can speak to being in like a smaller market. Patience and persistence really pays off. Don't compare yourself to like the work bars
Mm,
and the industrious that are like filling up, within a year after opening. It's likely not going to be like that in a small market. So I think that's an important to, if you have that expectation from the get go. And kind of along those lines, make sure that you have your own financial situation squared before, you know, make sure you have the right expectations about when you're actually going to be able to take salary out of your business. That's something that I totally screwed up. And I had to like scramble to get clients again after I opened because I was like, oh shit, I'm like
yeah.
not making any money. So
Yeah.
that's a big one. And I think as far as expanding, I would say, at least for me, it's really been about finding the right partners. Having the right partners that really value what you're doing makes a huge difference. So I would advise against trying to force anything to happen.
Yeah.
If
Don't
they're
talk somebody into you, but I mean, you got talked into them, which,
Yeah,
yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. If they're kind of having doubts about your business model or
Yeah.
uncertain about it, or they don't think they're going to make enough money off of it, it's probably not the right
Don't
partnership.
force that.
So, wait for those people that like really see how what you're doing is either going to bring value to the city or to their development or to whatever, project it is that they have going on.
Yeah, I love that tip because then instead of defending numbers and how fast the ramp up is and is it not what you projected, like they see the bigger. I mean, I'm guessing maybe there are difficult conversations, sometimes
Yes.
no matter what, but the
Yes,
developer you're working with has this like bigger why. It's not just financial for him. I'm guessing there's
exactly.
certainly a level of financial interest, but yeah.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, but
Yeah.
that's also so unique. I've never heard anybody say like, "Oh, the developer joined my joined my space and,
Yes.
got
Yeah.
really involved." And yeah, that's I mean, visiting the space is one thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, pretty incredible. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah.
Well, thanks for spending the time to share your story. It was really interesting for me to hear your path. And I think people listening to the podcast, it's just always so good to hear like, "Oh, I relate to that," or, "That's what it might look like, if I start a space in
Mhm.
a market like
Yeah.
that." And congrats. I mean, 10 years and 2 locations, and now
I
you're off on
know.
a new adventure and still have this business and a team that's, rocking and rolling. So, I'm sure it doesn't
Thank you.
seem as easy as that all the time, but if
Yes,
you
yeah.
sort of take a moment and appreciate, like, that's fantastic. So,
Yeah, it's
um,
exciting. We're throwing a big
yeah.
party for our 10-year
Ooh,
anniversary, so
fun.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, as one should, for sure.
Yes, yeah, it's I'm not normally one to throw parties for myself, but I'm like, "Okay, this
10
is
years.
like, I need to throw a party for
You
myself."
totally do. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been great. This podcast is such a great resource for the co-working community, so it's fun to chat with you.
Um